In 2009, my brother came hurtling into the house screaming my name. When an annoyed 17-year-old me answered, he insisted that I needed to come outside and see this. I took my time getting up, walking through the house before finally stepping out the side door to be greeted by the setting sun on a cool summer night. I could see my brother running towards my parents, standing at the property line, along with the neighbors who we don't speak to. All of them are looking up into the sky. My dad and the father of the neighbors were both pointing up, and as I got closer, I could hear my dad say as he arced his arm across the sky, "It went shooting that way." They had all seen the same thing. A large disc was hovering off the ground of a farm field behind our properties. There were no lights on it, but with the dying evening light, they could see it. And as they stood and watched, it slowly rise up from the ground, peaking at a few hundred feet off the ground, and then as if shot out of a slingshot, this circular object sprinted across the sky and out of view. I stepped out a moment too late, and to this day, their story has not changed, their memory has not altered, and they stand by the 6 of them were witness to a UFO. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. I am your host, Kayla, and Samantha is back with me because, well, we're back for a second time on this specific episode because I had a microphone malfunction on the last one. And I also just noticed that my notes say, "I am your goat," not host. So
I'm just going to start calling you my goat from now on.
I actually had a dream about a goat last night, and that it was like, it had like circled through our front yard a couple of times, and somebody had spray painted it blue and wrapped a American flag around it and like tied it into its fur. And so then I was like, I need to save this goat. And so I brought it inside and I untied the flag from its fur, and then we realized that it was super skinny, and so we took it out to the barn, and I was trying to figure out what to give it to eat, and I put it in a stall with a third horse who was this giant horse, and his name was Walter. And the goat went and the goat went in the stall, and it laid down and curled up, and the horse came over and he just laid down and curled up with it.
Oh, that's a weird dream.
There's no point to it. It was just like an average day.
I have wild dreams too. It's okay.
Okay, so we are doing this, well, we were supposed to do this episode for Halloween, and clearly that didn't work out. And then we were supposed to record earlier this month, and I got sick, so that didn't work out. So now you're getting a mid-November UFO story, and welcome everyone, all of the listeners.
Belated Halloween story.
So, I wanted to start off, last time we recorded, you talked a little bit about your UFO story. Would you like to say that again?
Oh yeah. Okay. I always struggle with like where to start with this one because there were like so many different components, or I'm just like, it was just so wild. Like, and it was also around Halloween. It was like Halloween weekend, I remember. And I still have, I think my son was like I was in survival mode. I don't remember exactly how many months, but he wasn't even a year yet.
Yeah,
I had just put
survival
him,
mode.
yeah, survival mode. And I had just put him down to bed, and my husband, I think this was the first time I was left home alone, like just me and my newborn. And so my husband was on a hunting trip, and I get my son down, finally get my son down to bed, and I like settle down on the couch, and I'm like, okay, in the spirit of Halloween, let me watch, some sort of Halloween related movie, but I'm a scaredy cat, so it was like Twilight. Like,
Yeah,
he's
same.
got vampires and werewolves, like good enough.
Good.
Like,
Dun, dun, dun. Okay,
yeah.
I'm good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think I was like halfway through the movie, and all of a sudden, like I heard like a bloop, bloop, bloop. And so I paused the movie because I'm like, what the heck was that? Was it like one of my husband's gaming consoles like going off or something? And so like I paused everything and I heard it again, and it was coming from outside behind me. And so I look out the window, and sure as shit, like I see like an unidentified flying object. Like
Yeah.
it was like a rounded off triangle, and it had like green lights like tapering off like on the sides, and then one main beam like white light in the front, and it would like slowly hover down and then slowly go up and then move forward and then like down, up, move forward, like it was searching for something. And it was so fucking weird because it was out there for hours, and like my first thought was like, oh my god, like I'm terrified UFO. And then I like calm myself down, like, okay, no, it's Halloween weekend, there's a bunch of kids like probably messing with the neighbors with their drone, right? Like,
Yeah.
but the fact that it was out there for hours and the way it moved, it was smooth. Like drones are kind of like they're
They're
rigid.
jolty.
Yeah, they're kind of like jerky and rigid, and it was just smooth. And like, dude, to this day, I swear to God, like so it's either one of two things, because I live in Colorado, so it was either like the Air Force Academy testing either like some new equipment or something that they haven't released to the public, or it's aliens. And I like it's got to
Did
be one
you
of the two.
hear about apparently like this last week, Sam was telling me that Congress held a like meeting about UFOs, and they were like, yeah,
Just nonchalant. Yeah, they're real.
Yeah, they were like, yeah, there's aliens in the ocean, or like something along the lines of that. And it was
I heard
like,
about that.
I guess the driving force for them to release this information was like, America's not the only country that has UFO alien information. Do you want your citizens hearing about it from you or from somebody else?
Interesting.
So I thought that was just perfect timing for
Honestly,
this episode.
I believe that there are aliens out there. I mean, space is infinite. Of course, I think you'd be naive to think that there wasn't anything out there.
Oh yeah.
But like, I think the big question though is like, well, have they made contact? Yeah. And is the government covering it up? Those are the big questions. Like,
the government is covering up. I mean, they're trying to. Stories like this, though, kind of indicate that they're not doing the best job because they just leave too many loose ends.
Yeah. Well, I think it was easier back then to cover it up, but like as our technology advances and as more advanced technology is available to the everyday public, it's going to be harder and harder to contain some of that information, and people have questions. Like,
and people also have answers, and they're willing to provide those answers. It's just like, how long is somebody going to dismiss these events that have happened and just be like, you're dreaming, you didn't see that, there's a logical explanation,
Mm-hmm.
and admit that something unexplainable happened. This is a logical conclusion that
Mm-hmm.
extraterrestrial creatures might have been a cause. So, speaking of Colorado, that's where this story occurs, and it's right outside of Alamosa in the San Luis Valley, which I guess is kind of a hub of some really bizarre experiences. This area is also home to the Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve, which hold the tallest sand dunes in North America, which stand up to 750 feet or 228 meters tall. The park has the International Dark Sky Park designation for a good reason. Here, the endlessly clear skies feel so close that you could reach up and brush your fingers through the glowing stars, and this area has had reports of random lights in the sky for decades. Great Sand Dunes alone has had over 70 reports since the year 2000, with many more stemming from the San Luis Valley from decades prior. Reports of what, you may ask? The answer would be an astonishing unknown from those who receive the reports. But those who are witnessing the sightings know what they're seeing. They're seeing UFOs, also known as unidentified flying objects. They're also starting to use UAP, which is unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Anomalous. It's not anonymous.
I'm sure it's like something that has to do with like an anomaly, but
An
like
anomaly. Anomalous. Yes, thank you.
anomalous. Like glad I can
my
help.
my brain has not come fully back into functioning
Oh,
since being sick. And it's
I hear you.
like some of the things that I've done, like somebody will say something and I'll do something and I'm like, why did my brain go there? That makes no sense. Okay, so some of these reports include a circular object zigzagging through the sky. Others have seen, again, a circular object in the sky for long periods of time, like that of an hour. Other reports include a bright object hovering that was much larger than the stars surrounding it. And some others have been able to get what they saw on camera. And then one lady by the name of Judy Messeline decided to open a UFO watchtower. It started as something kind of like a joke, and she was kind of using this mysterious presence in the area as a way to attract tourists with, all of these random sightings. And then she was like, oh, it's a UFO tower. But since she's opened the watchtower in the year 2000, there have been over 300 reports of UFOs from the watchtower alone. Also at this watchtower is likely the most bizarre contribution to the proof of aliens. The bones of a horse named Snippy and the way she was found still cannot be conclusively explained today. Harry King, who lived with his mother Agnes on a ranch just outside of Alamosa in Colorado, was helping to care for his sister's horses that lived at the ranch. So his sister's name is Nellie, and she was married to Burl Lewis. Between Nellie and Burl, they had several horses. However, I couldn't find a source that said how many horses they had. So Harry King, who was Nellie's brother and looking after the horses, was potentially caring for a lot of horses.
Huh.
I also could not find if Harry or their mother had horses in addition, but no matter.
Yeah, I'm like, is that connected somehow?
I think the only reason I bring it up is because I think some people who are not horse people or not livestock people might look out in a pasture of horses that look similar and be like, how can you tell them apart?
Oh,
But
okay. That's
people
fair.
who care for these animals every day can tell. They can tell the
Yeah.
animals apart. They
Hmm.
can tell when they're acting weird. And this horse, Snippy, was actually named Lady. And so there's a couple of different sources that I found that state that Snippy was actually the name of the mother or the father of the horse. But when things started happening, somehow the name Snippy stuck to this horse.
So
And
was it more like a nickname?
um I mean, a lot of horses have nicknames. So eh,
But
they
what we need to
reference,
remember is it's the same horse, is what you're saying.
yeah.
Okay.
So
Lady and we'll just call her Lady Snippy.
Lady Snippy. I mean, maybe it was one of those things where, like, I mean, I have horses, so Snackers is kind of a jerk sometimes.
Hmm.
And I'll walk out to the barn and I'll be like, okay, Butthead. Like, his name's not Butthead, but I call him Butthead all the time.
Yeah. Right.
So it could be something where, like, somebody was like, oh,
Don't
she
be
was
snippy with
Snippy.
me. Yeah.
And somebody heard that and was like,
Hmm.
oh, that's her name. So whatever. No matter. Snippy was a 3-year-old Appaloosa mare, which is a very similar in breed to quarter horses, which are ranch bred horses. They're bred to do work and to be able to handle hauling things, working cattle, going hunting, climbing in the mountains, being in the
So would you say
desert.
she was a large horse? Like,
Average sized.
okay.
They're actually pretty short, as far as horses go.
But
For
are they stocky then? If it's supposed to be a
yes,
workhorse? Okay. Okay.
yes, they're very like broad chest, big muscles, and Appaloosas specifically have like a speckled or dotted pattern on their coat, and it can be a variety of colors. It can be black, it can be brown, it can be gray, it can be like a reddish. So Appaloosas are very easily identifiable because of that speckled or splotched pattern that they have.
Gotcha.
On September 7th, 1967, Harry called for the horses to come get their feed, and when all of them arrived, he noticed that Snippy was missing. So, what I'm assuming happened for people who are not livestock people, they were probably either in a large pasture or potentially free ranged. And so they didn't have fencing, but they would put food out in a specific area every day for their horses to come eat the food. And this would help prevent horses who maybe weren't fenced in from wandering so far off that they wouldn't come home. So he notices that Snippy was missing, but because horses have their own personalities and their own preferences, Harry didn't panic immediately. He just kind of figured that she found something that was more interesting than the food and she would be coming in later. But then after the second day that she didn't show up for food, Harry decided to go looking for her, and he found her a quarter-mile away. She was laying on her side and clearly deceased. For farmers and ranchers, it is not out of the ordinary to have animals go missing and to find that they have passed away. But the weird part of this was that not that he found her dead, but that her hoofprints ended 100 feet from where her body was lying. And in a straight line above her shoulders, the flesh, muscle, tendons, blood, and tissue were all stripped from the bones of Snippy's head and neck. Harry then called Nellie and her husband Burl to come check out what he had found, and they noticed more oddities. The cut around the base of Snippy's throat appeared to be cauterized. There was a sweet acetone-like scent in the air around her body, and they found shrubs nearby that had been smashed down along with 6 circular-shaped imprints on the ground. In addition to this, there were dark marks on the ground that they could not figure out what they were caused by. The closest they could come to a conclusion as to what made these marks was that it had to have been exhaust marks. But there were no tire tracks, and there was nothing to indicate a vehicle had been in the area.
Interesting. Okay. Okay, so you said, okay, so the only part of the horse that was mutilated was pretty much its like neck, shoulder, neck and up. Because like if it were like, I don't know, literally any other animal, usually they go for the soft spots first. So like intestines are usually the part that gets ripped out first, like wolves or coyotes. That's what they eat first. And if that was still intact, then I feel like that kind of negates like wildlife.
Yeah. It doesn't make any sense because the organs are what hold all the like really nutritious stuff that carnivores need. And so they're going to go for those first. The only things in the head and neck are that they can easily access anyways is muscle. Like there's not.
Yeah, I mean, like I can definitely see like, because like for like just going in for the kill, like usually they go for the throat first, but when they start eating, it's usually the softer tissue, like sometimes even around like the anus area.
Yeah.
But that's
the opposite side of the horse.
Yeah.
Like it's not making sense.
Yeah.
So,
and there were no tracks, like no other animal tracks.
There were no animal tracks. There were no footprints. There was no tire marks. There was nothing except for her footprints that ended 100 feet away from where her body was. So almost indicating that she was picked up and placed away from where she had been walking. And then also the circular shaped imprints in the ground.
And there was no storm.
No.
Like it didn't rain, that like nothing that could have like washed away or like blown over.
Nope.
Any other evidence.
And that's actually going to come into play a little bit later. But the other thing that I know I mentioned last time that we talked about this was that horses are very curious animals. They like to know what's going on with their herd members. So it's really odd to me that this horse would have been there for potentially a day, maybe 2, and that the other horses were just like, nope, I'm not touching it. Like
they
that
smelled
seems
something
odd
off.
to me.
Yeah.
Like it might not be that the horse, again, depending on their personalities and what all's going on, they might not go like fully up to the body and be like, huh, what's going on? Like sniffing around, but they would approach. And you would have a little bit more confusion because it sounds like it was just her tracks. They were able to identify which tracks were hers, which indicates that the other horses weren't stomping around on those tracks and kind of burying them.
That almost indicates that Snippy was actually out by herself to begin with. If there were no other tracks around.
Or there was something that assisted in this that made the other horses scared enough, or maybe the acetone.
Where Snippy's tracks ended, like how far of a distance? Because like if there were no other tracks around and it was only Snippy's, that would indicate she got separated from the herd before she got picked up at some point. Like, which is also kind of strange. Like maybe that's just why she was targeted.
Maybe
for this, I don't know, Yeah, it's just interesting how her behavior may have led to her either being targeted or this very specific. I don't know. It's
And
just, yeah.
there's no answers. There's some
Because
answers.
horses are social animals, right?
They are.
Like they generally keep to their herd. Um,
Yeah, so like even my horses, they're not best friends, but they want to be together.
yeah, I mean, there's
Um,
safety in numbers. I feel like it's instinctual
yeah.
almost.
To further complicate what people were observing here, they also noticed that the bones appeared to have a sun-bleached color to them, which would indicate that the bones were exposed to the elements for a long period of time, more than just the couple of days that she could have been laying there.
Hmm.
And then on one of the bushes, they found a dollop of green substance. And when Nellie picked it up, she had said that her hand was burning and itching until she was able to wash the residue off of her hands, which sounds like chemically. I
Hmm.
don't.
So her bones could have been chemically bleached by that mysterious substance.
Yeah. So at first I was like, okay, well, maybe the substance had something to do with all of the tissue being removed. Like they might have been able
Uh-huh.
to put it on and it would dissolve stuff. But that would
Mm-hmm.
also then, like, the flesh on your hands would probably start to dissolve. And it sounds like it probably worked pretty fast. So I don't
At
know.
least faster than what we have technology for, is what you're saying. Or
Maybe,
potentially. Yeah.
potentially. But also, that doesn't necessarily make sense because Nellie had it on her hands. And besides the itching and the burning, she wasn't talking about like there was a disintegration, there wasn't a breakdown or
Yeah.
anything. So
Huh.
I don't know how long it was on her hands though. So,
Uh-huh. Well, but like
um,
also like was there any residue of the same green substance found on Snippy's body?
no,
Okay. That
at least
almost
not that
makes
was noted.
me that almost makes me think that was more of a byproduct of not like a surgery or uh, just like a byproduct of something else totally completely different. It's like separate from Snippy. Like I
Maybe.
don't know, maybe like the alien itself or like is it fuel for the vehicles they used? But it wasn't
Ooh,
used on Snippy is from what
that's
it because like I from what it's because I feel like if they left residue everywhere else, why wasn't there residue left on Snippy?
yeah,
Like,
that's a good thought process. Or like maybe one of the aliens was sick and coughing up a whole lot of stuff like I
mhm.
was and was like, oh, gross, get that off of
Right?
me. And it flung onto a bush.
Or like if they were in a hurry or if they were inexperienced, like I don't know, a younger subspecies. I don't know, like um if they got like some of that chemical on or on themselves that they did use on Snippy or like one of their tool like there could have been an accident and like that's why there was some of that extra residue left behind.
Yeah.
God, like I feel like you could just deep dive into so much of this because like then also like the exhaust marks like was were there the exhaust marks next to that green substance like because then that would indicate some sort of fuel.
Yeah. So I think, of course, getting like hard evidence of what was found there is really difficult because this was in the 60s
Yeah.
in an alien town and people were less likely to honestly report on things that are related
Mm.
to aliens because I think at that
They,
time they were like, the government at least was like, no, no, no.
yeah.
So,
Or they
from
just
what
brush it
I
off like.
understand, the exhaust marks were closer to Snippy than they were to this bush.
Okay.
So, Dwayne Martin, who was a United States Forest Service employee, came out to Snippy's body to do some testing, and his findings would lead to an interesting twist because the marks on the ground that they were thinking were the exhaust marks and this green glob were both reading as radioactive. And radioactive means that these areas were giving off a form of energy that's similar to that of a microwave or an X-ray machine. The particles are giving off basically extremely active or electromagnetic energy, and these particles can disrupt living beings' function of tissues and organs and make them sick or cause death.
Huh.
But all living beings already produce a very slight amount of radioactive energy, but this is at like severely low levels, and so it's not disruptive to us because it's at such a low level. Like there's like a threshold of where like we're safe.
You're saying what was detected was at extremely low levels. It was above
that threshold.
Oh, it was. Okay.
So
how far above? Like, was it exponentially enough to be concerning, or just, hey,
enough
we
to be noted as radioactive? So people, like when we go to the doctor, they're not automatically labeling us as radioactive.
I feel like this is so hard because, like, man, it's fucking, that could mean anything. Like,
it could. And it could also be an explanation for how she died, because if they were extremely radioactive, encountering that disrupts function, and she could have just dropped dead.
Yep. So did they determine when the cause of death was? Like, did they determine if Snippy died before her head was severed and she was mutilated, or after?
So I think the knowledge of how to like take a body temperature and determine the time of death based on body temperature was after.
Oh, the time period. Okay.
They probably also weren't focused on doing that with livestock.
That's
like
fair.
That was probably pretty low on the list.
Just a lot of open like
there. Yes.
Man, I feel like if that were to happen today, the investigation would be very different. But that's like the hard thing about like these kinds of cases that happened way back then, is like they just don't have, like, even for common everyday people like us, we know that certain technology exists. We know that we can determine time of death and if mutilation occurred before or after. Like,
so all of this information was relayed to the Alamosa County Sheriff, Ben Phillips. And this is where the storm comes in. He contributed the death and the burn marks and the radioactive readings to a lightning strike. He completely ignored the fact that there had been no storms, there had been no storm activity, there had been no lightning reports in the area for days prior
that's interesting.
to this discovery. So naturally, people in this area start naming aliens as the culprit, but the police are like, nah, that's not what caused this death. So they were kind of pressured to continue this investigation. The following day, when they went back out, they noticed that the bones had a pink tint to them, almost like they were freshly cleaned. So it's like the bones went backwards a little bit.
How in the heck? That doesn't make any sense. Like, so like even if we can, okay, so like let's just entertain the thought that it was aliens. What would be the point of the reverse biodegrading? Like, why? That's just what I don't get. Like, it's because it wasn't preserved. It's literally going backwards.
Yeah. So my only thought that might explain it is that somebody wrote the date down wrong.
Okay.
But
that would make sense.
I would hope that police investigators are better at their jobs than writing down the incorrect dates.
I mean, I guess with how I feel like you'd be surprised with like how many discrepancies like can show up like within an investigation. Because like I
Yeah.
used to volunteer for the crime lab with the Colorado Springs, and there all sorts of shit just pops up, and like that's a lot of the times the reason why things get dismissed is just, there's so many things to account for, and like sometimes when you're understaffed and you have one officer investigating multiple different things, like he could write down, I mean, it's really easy to mix up dates, like
Yeah.
especially if they have multiple completely different investigations going on, like, and if they're short staffed, they are rapidly switching between one task between another, like it's, they're people too. And
Yeah.
especially back then when they didn't have computers to easily keep track of all these things, or
Or
somebody's
cell
handwriting,
phones.
could have just been crap.
Yeah.
And whoever was entering it into the database, or I guess they probably didn't have databases back then, or whoever's copying the information from one
Yeah.
log into another could have just read it wrong. Like there were so many different things that, so like that would be a viable explanation, but there's so many other unanswered questions,
There
so
are.
many other things that don't line up, and when you put them all together, it really does make you start to think like what other one thing fits the narrative of every other single thing
Yeah.
that we're trying that it's just this massive puzzle, like, and I feel like only one answer fits, like, because
One answer does fit,
I
and it's
certainly can't think of anything else. Like, call
aliens.
me, maybe I am ignorant. I don't know. I am, but you don't know what you don't know, I guess. But
Yeah. So at this same time that this investigation was kind of like ramping up and they were like, all right, police are involved. We got to get an answer.
Mhm.
Dr. John Altschuler was found trespassing in the Great Sand Dunes National Park. He was there after dark and he was searching for UFOs. So this doctor was an extremely well-known and incredibly thorough pathologist. And so when police learned of this, they were like, hey, we won't arrest you, but you have to come do some work for us. And he was like, fine, yes, I will not
and
go to jail.
I think I understand what pathology is, but can you explain to me real quick, like what the specific definition of that is, or like what specifically it entails, just to have like a
So,
very clear understanding of what this guy is and is
path,
getting brung in for.
yeah, so pathology is the study of
Is it
natural
it's
diseases.
diseases? Okay, okay.
And there's, as with a lot of things in medicine, there's like different types.
Uh-huh.
So like within pathology, there is anatomical pathology, there's chemical pathology, and clinical pathology.
Okay.
Based on what is happening here, anatomical pathology is, which is the study of assessing various diseases based on tissue. I'm going to guess that's where he landed.
Specializes. Okay, okay.
So he was like, of course, he was like, yeah, I don't want to go to jail or pay a fine because I'm out looking for UFOs. Yeah, sure, I'll help you on this case. And then potentially learned that it was UFO related, and he was like, yeah,
I'm in. What I find
so
that is such a big coincidence, though. Like, it almost makes me wonder if he had something to do with Snippy's death.
that's a good question.
But how? How would he have? It's such a big like so many questions. Like, I feel like it's a huge coincidence that that this guy with this knowledge and this obsession just happened to be caught trespassing in this general area, and
that's a
it's
good connection. I did not
but
pick up on that.
at the same time, like he only has so much technology available to him.
Yeah.
And that's to assume he has the technology to leave all this evidence without a trace, and he has this capabilities to leave exhaust and no tracks, and he's one guy.
Yeah.
But it's such a big coincidence, like.
But yeah, so I think we talked about this last time too, was that based on like the stuff that happened, if a human was to do this, it sounds very unreasonable that it was one person. Like, I feel like you would just need like a team of 3 to accomplish this in one night, because you don't want to get caught. You don't know when Harry's going to go investigate his missing horse.
Yeah.
He could have gone immediately after he noticed that she was missing. And I mean, that could be a risk that you're taking. But also, there was nothing left behind. Like, no tracks.
Yeah. That's the part that gets me. Like, he would have to have access to something that flies. That is the only thing that wouldn't leave tracks.
So
like,
maybe,
or I don't know how, or something that would cover up tracks. Like, I'm not an expert at covering up tracks. Like, I've literally had no reason to cover up my own tracks while hunting elk or any, like, but I'm sure that idea or that knowledge exists somewhere. But why and how would he have knowledge of how to cover up his own tracks? And specifically, how would he to cover up the equipment that it would take to move an animal of that size?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
That, because like I'm not opposed to the idea that, like, okay, maybe this guy had something to do with it, but I just literally, I'm ignorant. I don't know how you would explain it.
There's
like,
still
I'm
too many
leaning towards
loose ends.
UFOs. I'm leaning towards aliens because I would love to hear from some of your followers, like what their ideas would be if they have.
Did a UFO kill Snippy?
Yeah. Or like, do they have any other theories? Like, what could possibly align with all of the evidence or lack thereof?
Yeah. And a little bit later here, we're going to come up, well, the police provided some answers, if you want to call them that.
Quote unquote.
But they still don't account for everything. And so this doctor, when he goes out and he investigates, he finds that the cut was, quote unquote, some of the cleanest cuts he had ever seen, and there was no material in the spinal column, which is like, how are you getting that out? Like,
because we don't have technology to accomplish that.
Right. So, and that's something else, was that he notes that the cuts around her neck were black and firm at the edges, and coupled with the lack of blood anywhere around Snippy, which, like, if you're making a cut on a body, you're getting blood.
Yeah.
So how do you not bleed at the same time that you're making a cut is to cauterize it at the same time. And that technology didn't exist at that time.
Unless this procedure or mutilation, whatever you want to call it, happened in a different location than where she was actually found.
Maybe. That's, but then also...
But there's no tracks.
So then that circles all the way back to, okay, you have a vehicle that's moving the body. It could explain the exhaust marks. But then how are you covering up those tracks? Because it's not like people can pick up the horse.
Yeah. I mean, if it were an unidentified flying object, it wouldn't leave any other track.
Yeah. So coming back to potentially aliens did this. And so they ended up doing a necropsy, which is an autopsy on an animal. And they did this to try to determine exactly how Snippy died. And they found that when they cut open her skull to check out her brain, that her brain was already gone, and they it was gone.
Hold on. So you're telling me that from the outside, like from first you walk up and you look at Snippy's body, there is no damage to like the physical part of her skull
The skull
area.
is completely intact.
But her brain was gone.
But the brain was gone. There was no fluid. There was no tissue left. It was completely clean.
What was the time lapse between, like, what, I guess, I don't know if the correct question is like when she died and when they found her body. Well, I guess that would only be 2 days. So that's not enough time for like bugs and for like natural decomposition. That's not enough time.
There was roughly 3 weeks between them finding her, which again was a couple of days potentially after she died, and then being done with her body. So this time was somewhere in the 2 to 3 week range, which maybe bugs could have gotten in there. But if bugs did that much damage to the brain, you would assume that it did damage to the rest of her body as well, which is something that I haven't mentioned yet, was that her internal organs were also missing. Like her intestines were there, but the heart, the liver, the thyroid.
What about her eyes? Were her eyes still intact?
Her eyes were missing. Okay,
because that is a very common soft tissue area for, I think, bugs to try and like work their way in. Like that's generally where they start, like with decomposition.
The eyes were missing immediately. So if the bugs did that, they would have had to do it within 2 days.
Yeah. Okay, but it does leave an open wound that would make it easily accessible to get into the brain area, but it still leaves open the question of like, why wasn't, because she was severed at the neck.
Yes.
So why wasn't the rest of her, like why weren't there bugs and maggots found eating away at like the rest of the organs? Were they found? In the rest?
From my understanding, it was basically just like digestive tract stuff that was left. And they never figured out how the other stuff was removed from the body without disrupting everything else, because they were going in through the only logical explanation was that they went in through the neck.
Yeah.
Which means that they would have been digging around and moving things around. And from what their notes was that these things were missing and everything else seemed to be in place.
Yeah, so that would require like technology that we don't have.
Yeah.
Theoretically, or that we don't know about. But even if it was some like government entity with secret knowledge that at that time the public didn't know about, what would be the purpose of it? Like some random farmer's horse, like, yeah.
So after the necropsy happened and authorities were like, there's nothing more we can get, there's no more information we can get from her body, they gave the body to Dr. Wallace Leary, who then began the process of preparing her to be displayed outside of his veterinary office building. So he was a vet, and when he was cleaning her bones, he found 2 small caliber bullet wounds. When he was cleaning her bones, he found 2 small caliber bullet wounds in her right flank. So the flank on a horse is kind of where the belly and the side meet, kind of like up on the side. So it's not like down on the belly, it's not up on the hip, it's like on the side of the horse. And the, I guess, noteworthy thing here is that he found those holes after the necropsy, which was trying to determine how she died. So
interesting.
it
How would they miss that?
Yeah. It implies that they maybe weren't doing their best work. Or they just didn't know. They were just like, I don't know what this is. Moving on. So theories at this point start popping up, and they're ranging from that Snippy got scared and caught up in barbed wire and sliced her neck open, and then someone found her suffering and they decided to cut the neck themselves to end her suffering.
But why would it be scorched or like charred or burnt in the way that you described it?
Yeah. Unknown.
Huh.
So experts reasoned that scavengers and ants could have easily picked the bones clean and then continued inward and consumed the organs. However, there's not really an explanation as to why the skin was in, like, the cut was in such a straight line. And coupling that with the fact that the rest of her body was untouched on the outside just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I agree.
And then this is my favorite theory just because it's comical. Like, it doesn't make any sense. A columnist from the Rocky Mountain News said that the horse could have tripped and fallen with its head into a band of cannibal ants.
What? Okay, hold on. First of all, if the ants were cannibal, wouldn't they eat themselves?
Yes.
Not the horse.
Yes. Which is...
Woo, all right. This is a lesson for everybody to watch.
I will
where they
go
get
on
their news
record and
from.
say that I don't think it was cannibal ants that did this, because cannibal ants eat other ants.
Oh, okay.
So, as we've kind of already mentioned, not all of these things can be explained, and conclusions can kind of be pieced together from different things, and those conclusions don't necessarily explain each other. So, like, okay, sure, she might have cut herself on barbed wire, but then why are there bullet holes in her? Sure, she might have been shot, but then why was her neck sliced and cauterized? Like, it just doesn't make sense. But eventually, after the veterinarian was like, I've acquired these bones, I've cleaned them, and I've found bullet holes, 2 boys came forward and admitted that they shot Snippy. They didn't say that they shot Snippy. They just said that they shot. I feel like
it was obvious that somebody had shot her. Like, they found bullet holes, but whether it's just a question of whether that was related to this very specific incident or not, or if it was just coincidental, whether it happened beforehand,
right?
And she already sustained those injuries and was living with them because they were what caliber?
22 caliber.
Oh, and that's such a tiny caliber.
It is. Yeah. And so the something worth noting, at least with horses specifically, is that if they get an infection in their joint, it's downhill decline. They're not doing well. And if that infection gets bad enough where they lay down and they are in too much pain to get up, there's a very short window where you can get that horse up and treated before they are past the point of no return. And there's potential that one of these bullets might have ended up in a hip joint, which is a major joint. And if an infection got in there and nobody knew that she had an infection there, she could have laid down, couldn't got back up. But then that doesn't explain anything else. And
explains one very specific piece of the puzzle.
That explains maybe how the horse ended up on the ground.
Yeah.
There was a report that was released by the University of Colorado in Boulder where researchers were commissioned by the Air Force to investigate this. And I don't think that they actually went out to the body. I think that they were like after the fact and they just looked at notes. And They determined that there was no evidence to support the assertion that the horse's death was associated in any way with the abnormal. This report is also known as the Condon Report, and because of its association with the United States government, it is highly criticized by those who
rightfully
support UFOs and aliens and...
Well, but if they said that there was nothing abnormal, well then can they say, does the report say what was normal?
Yeah, can they explain?
Yeah, because I would argue that if you can't tell me how specifically she died and give me logical explanations for any of this, then it is absolutely abnormal.
Then that's abnormal. Yeah.
Yeah.
So other reports would also reference and counter each other. For example, Dr. Robert Adams reported that he found the death of Snippy could not have been caused by anything unearthly, but Nellie, who was the owner of the horse, mentioned that they saw that there was no one on the property. There was nothing abnormal going on, at least like animal wise, like all of their other horses and all of their other livestock were acting normal. Nobody had been out there. And
well, if nobody had been out there, I mean, at least that they know of, because obviously they didn't know that those two boys were around to even shoot Snippy. So, I mean, take this part with a grain of salt, I guess. But,
yeah. And the report never even addressed the sweet smell from Snippy's body, which is like the complete opposite of what the decomposing bodies normally do.
Yeah.
They normally smell really bad, not
gaseous,
sweet. And so the report also didn't explain where Snippy's blood went or how the body ended up 100 feet from where the hoofprints ended. People who didn't believe in aliens, but also didn't believe the reports that were being released by like the police and investigators, blamed a secret government project or a satanic cult.
Okay.
So
I can kind of see a satanic cult, but
that again would require people removing their own tracks.
Yeah, that's where I'm stuck, because like I guess it would explain the lack of blood. Like, I don't know, maybe they severed her head and like collected the blood for whatever weird
but then
ritual.
Why leave the bones? And who's an expert enough in a horse's bones to be able to place them perfectly back on the ground?
Yeah, that's weird.
But so in the 1960s and the 1970s, the United States would see several reports of strange livestock mutilations. And this wasn't just in Colorado, it was also in Nebraska and Kansas, where multiple reports of cattle being killed and their organs being removed. More specifically, their eyes would be removed, their
just like
ears.
Snippy's.
Reportedly, there were over 10,000 of these reports over a decade-long period. And people in Nebraska started noticing low-flying helicopters after like a lot of these reports had started going. And these helicopters would be coming through after dark. They were completely unmarked. And because this was intersecting with the same time that these mutilations were occurring, farmers were worried that this might be the government testing out biological weapons. And so some of the residents started shooting at the helicopters so much that it became an issue that the National Guard in Nebraska had to increase the altitude of the flights from 1,000 to 2,000 feet to avoid being shot at.
That's really funny. But okay, so if they acknowledge that they were increasing flight, then that does mean that it wasn't
they were
aliens.
flying around out there.
Yeah. So it wasn't aliens this time.
Maybe. I mean, it could have just been them being like, oh, we're going to go look for whatever's mutilating these animals.
Oh, well.
And then they don't want to admit that they're looking for what's mutilating the animals, because if they don't know what's mutilating the animals, that's going to cause panic.
Right.
Or
but
it
that's what
might
I
be
meant. Like that particular, like that doesn't mean that there wasn't a previous circumstance that
right.
involved aliens as to why they were out there, but they do admit being out there.
Yes. And so in addition to Nebraska having this thing, Minnesota had cattle and sheep that were found mutilated, drained of blood, and then the cuts were made with surgical precision. And it wasn't just cattle and sheep that they began finding like this. They were also finding wild animals such as deer, moose, elk, rabbits, bison, and pigs.
That's a lot.
While this is just like a couple of examples, this was happening kind of all over, but mostly in the Midwest United States. The states of South Dakota, Colorado, and New Mexico also had large numbers of mutilations.
Do you think that has anything to do with population density?
I didn't even look. But the Midwest is like farmers. So it makes sense that they would have more livestock, right?
Right.
But then also South America and Australia had reports of these strange mutilations.
Interesting.
So it wasn't just the United
worldwide.
States. Yeah. And this is only the beginning. Well, maybe not really the beginning, but this is only adding fuel to the fire for the obsession of finding proof of aliens. So then, well, whether you believe or not, there are definitely situations that defy logic. And I personally believe, and I think you do too, that there's life out there.
Oh, and absolutely.
We don't know about it. And I think that's fine. I think that's really curious. But also, I think humans can also be the worst monsters. And there's potential that a human came along and did all of these things. Like, potentially the person who was living there and caring for the horses. I mean, I don't think horse deaths are investigated the same way that human deaths are. And so,
especially not in that time.
Yeah, they probably never even thought to like question the owner of the horse or the landowner,
and they were
be like,
just property. Like,
why is this thing happening here? And did you have something to do with it? They probably didn't even touch on that.
Yeah. And if it was the owner, then they would have, home turf, they would have had the time and the wherewithal and to cover up their tracks. And I know this knowledge exists. Like, there's people out there who know how to cover up their own tracks. Like, so it's possible, and if you have enough time to do it, like
2 days.
I suppose that is perfectly reasonable, like a perfectly reasonable explanation. So you would just hope that that's not the case, especially like if there were no other reported cases of that within that specific farm. Like, I would assume that if it were the owners of Snippy, like there would be other reported cases of mutilation in any capacity, if they were that cruel.
Or they were just looking for notoriety, and like I don't know what their business was, or if they had like, people came to their farm to like camp or something. It might have been a draw to be like, aliens were here. But
like tourists.
I didn't see anything along those lines that was like, they made a living from people coming to stay at their property or borrow any of their horses or anything like that. So, that's purely just a theory. Was, humans are not always the kindest creatures, but I don't
you know
have
what?
an explanation.
That almost explains more as to like the theory that it would be aliens, because I mean, like, I have a theory of like why we haven't encountered aliens, and that's literally because of our cruelty. They look at like both fiction and nonfiction stories of like like Hitler, like, oh my God, these people are batshit crazy. Why would I want to make contact with this species? Or like they look at all of
Yeah.
like the fictional stories of like Independence Day, like, oh my gosh, like I am not messing with these
Yeah.
guys. Like, let's
Yeah.
move on. Like, or why
Yeah.
they're so secretive, like within their contact, like with our planet, like.
Yeah. And like that's such a valid point that like they could have determined that, you know, we're not a good fit for whatever it is they're looking for. And it's because, I mean, I think nature is cruel in its own way of keeping life balanced. And you can see that with evolution and the dinosaurs and how predators get their food now.
Yep.
And I think that like we as humans, of course, if you're, you know, very religious, you might not agree with my thought process here, but like we as humans evolved from animals. And so we have those same instincts to hunt and be violent that we have just been suppressing for so long that I think sometimes it comes out, and we see that in some of the darker people who commit really violent crimes or you know, just maybe not act on the things but have like the really dark storytelling capacity. You know, that's just the more violent side of our nature coming out. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I think it's a good thing or like anything like that. Like, nope. I do think that like we need to be more civilized, but it's not surprising to me that humans are violent. Like, it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. And that is an entirely plausible explanation for what happened to Snippy.
Maybe.
Although I would honestly rather it be aliens than humans. It makes me really sad. Like, you know, and like there's so many different theories of explanations as to why like it could be aliens too, or like what their purpose was. Like it's just exploratory for them. Like maybe their planet or whatever, like they're literally trying to find resources, and they need to figure out if that animal would be compatible in their ecosystem for whatever reason. Like, you know,
and I mean, it could have been, I mean, okay, aliens. Say Snippy was shot and died after she got an infection, had a hurt leg, laid down, couldn't get up, lungs collapsed, done. And then the aliens came in and were like, wait a second, we got this thing right here. Why don't we use it? And it could have just been like some young guns out there trying to figure out the answer to some problem their parents are having. And they're like, we're going to use this horse. And then they never came back because their parents were like, are you such idiots? Don't go to the humans.
Or it's like these aliens that have like it's like the rite of passage for like youth or whatever, and they're all just fucking with us. Like,
it's like the ding dong ditch of aliens.
Yep.
I'm almost done, buddy.
That was the case.
Logan's making a guest appearance here. All right, what's your name?
Logan.
And how old are you?
6.
6. And
I almost said 7.
You're almost 7. How? Okay, so you said you believe in aliens, right? Yeah. Okay, and what do you think aliens look like?
Green monsters with chubby cheeks.
Chubby cheeks. That's a good guess. Well,
does he think that they would be friendly?
And they also have blasters. Do you think that they would be friendly?
Yes.
Okay. They'd
They
come
would
down
help
and
us.
they'd be like, hey, let's play. Tag, you're it.
Tag you it.
All right. Do you want to say, we are just finishing up. So do you want to say, everyone?
We are just finishing up, everyone.
Do you want to say thanks for listening?
Thanks for listening.
Thank you, buddy. Mwah.
You did a great job, Logan.
All right.
That was cute. Oh.
He just went to the door and he dropped the ball and he was like,
Aye, Captain.
all right. Well, everyone, to reiterate what Logan said, thank you for listening. Come back next week. And Sam, thank you for doing this with me a second time.
My pleasure.
Hopefully the technology works this time.
And let's do this again. I love doing these with you. Like, they're just very thought-provoking and exploratory. I love it. I love all of it.
Awesome. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.